What's going on, YouTube? Andrew Miller, Shane Black from Hook'emHeadlines.com and the Hook'em Horn Show. We're coming back at y'all today with an early preview of the college football playoff semifinals game, the Sugar Bowl, between number 3 Texas and number 2 Washington. Texas gets in the playoff for the first time ever
Let's go.
today. Yeah.
Let's go.
I'm so psyched to be able to cover a playoff game. That feeling of when you saw Texas on the screen as the 3 seed was just kind of like a feeling like no other. I mean, like it's always fun to see like a March Madness on Selection Sunday sort of thing, but like this is a completely different tone. Completely different feeling, and I think that if Texas shows up like they have the last 2 weeks, like they've played the last 2 weeks, beating Oklahoma State in the Big 12 title game and Texas Tech in the regular season finale, just beating them to a pulp, really, winning by a combined 78 points, that they have a good shot. Texas opens up as a 4.5 point favorite in FanDuel Sportsbook over Washington. They are right now. Texas has the 3rd best odds to win the entire thing, to win the national championship game. Right now it's Michigan 1 and Alabama 2, Texas 3, Washington 4. Texas got here by beating Oklahoma State 49-21 yesterday in the Big 12 championship game. Decided victory, I think, also one that, was more of a blowout on the field than it was on the scoreboard. Texas kind of let off the gas in the second half. And yeah, I mean, just this historic season continues for the Longhorns. Steve Sarkisian has already accomplished so many goals this season, and gone beyond that. First Big 12 title since 2009, first double-digit win season before the postseason since 2009 as well, and now a chance at a national championship in just his 3rd year at Texas. Unbelievable trajectory. I mean, 5-7 his first year in 2021, proves to 8-5 last year. Could have been 9-4 if some more players had stuck around for the Alamo Bowl, but I guess we can get into that later. And then 12-1 this season with an opportunity to win 13 or 14 games. I don't know what the biggest turnarounds in Texas history are, but this has to be one of them. This is a huge opportunity for Texas. I'm ecstatic. This is the first college football playoff that I've ever covered. Whether I was on the beat so that's just like a personal thing for me that I'm really excited for. And I'm sure, Texas fans all have their own like reason to be excited for this beyond the obvious that, we're finally here, like almost 10 years after the first college football playoff, Texas gets here. This was a crazy Selection Sunday. I think the most highly anticipated Selection Sunday for college football, maybe since the first playoff. For the first time, you had an undefeated Power 5 conference champion get left out in Florida State. I remember seeing this morning the reaction from Florida State after they were left out, and that was tough to see. It's crazy to think that even with the quarterback situation they have, that we ended up at a spot where there were so many like deserving teams to get into the playoff. That 12-1 Georgia team that got left out this year would have easily been a shoo-in for the playoff last year.
Yep.
So it's crazy to think, but as soon as I saw Texas show up in the 3 spot against Washington, you knew almost that Alabama was going to get in over Florida State, setting that precedent of the 1-loss Power 5 champion getting in over an undefeated Power 5 champion.
Yeah, and going off that is we don't have to go too deep down the rabbit hole of the top 4 selection, but the committee it's not really a precedent set because they're like, wipe the hands clean, we're going to 12 next year. So that's kind of like fine and dandy for them. They're like, all right, Florida State, sorry to you, but we don't have to deal with this anymore. So
I put together kind of a college football playoff info article. If you want to go check that out, I'll link that in the description below. It just has like schedule, times, important dates, how to watch, stream, things like that. But the first game for the semifinals is the Rose Bowl between number 1 Michigan, number 4 Alabama. Alabama at this point is a 1-point favorite. Michigan's a 1-point favorite over Alabama. Opened as a 2-point favorite in FanDuel Sportsbook. That one is January 1st in Pasadena at, I believe, 4 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Pacific time, 5 p.m. Eastern. And then the second game is number 3 Texas against number 2 Washington at the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans, Caesars Superdome. That is a 7:45 Central Time kickoff. Both games are on ESPN. Texas right now is a 4-point favorite in FanDuel, opened as 4.5 points, but I expect that line to stay a little bit steadier than Alabama, Michigan.
Yep.
Just because, yeah, I don't think much more needs to be said than that. But yeah, this is huge for Texas to get, I think, to get at the Sugar Bowl, because I think that there's going to be a great burnt orange turnout there. Texas had a great show out yesterday for the Big 12 championship game. I mentioned that in the video we did yesterday. Even up in the press box, probably had a better view of, how, like, what the distribution of the fans was between Texas and Oklahoma State. And Oklahoma State's got a good crowd in Dallas, and they had a really good showing 2 years ago for the Baylor-Oklahoma State game. But I got to say, it was probably 60 to 70% Texas fans at least yesterday for the Big 12 title game. And so in the playoff, you got Washington traveling all the way down from Seattle. I know Kalen DeBoer mentioned that he would like to get the Rose Bowl game, but, you got a much stronger Texas presence in New Orleans than you do Washington.
Yeah, one of the more underrated aspects of the selection, obviously everyone's talking about 4 and 5 with Alabama and Florida State, but Michigan holding on to that one spot over Washington, ends up being crucial. Matchups aside, like you mentioned, Washington much rather would play in the Rose Bowl closer to home, have one of these teams have to come out west to meet their team, their fan base. But yeah, I mean, Washington's going to travel. They have a solid fan base, but it should be favored Texas inside Mercedes-Benz or the Superdome, whatever it's called these days. But I think another underrated part is Michigan holding on to that one spot. They did not want to play a game on turf down in the South against Texas or Alabama. So like that was a luck out for them. You think Michigan obviously still has to travel to the Rose Bowl, but they're going to come in droves, and they're playing on grass, which for their style of football suits them well. So yeah, I mean, all in all, these are two fantastic matchups. I didn't really have a horse in it with Florida State. My thoughts were, if I was on the committee, I mean, I can see how you go both ways. I would have leaned Florida State. I'm happy it wasn't Florida State, because I think these matchups are going to be a lot more fun to watch. And, the Rose Bowl set that primer as Texas fans, we watched that one for 3.5 hours, sweating out kickoff against Washington. But
the college football playoff national championship game for the winners of the two semifinal games is at Energy Stadium in Houston on January 8th. So, potential for a Texas-Alabama rematch inside the state of Texas would be very exciting. Even if it's Texas-Michigan, I think, Texas would have the edge in terms of crowd support for that one, because just short trip over from Austin to Houston. Let's go and get into just some of the early preview for the Sugar Bowl, for the semifinal game. So I mentioned Texas 1-score favorite against Washington. Texas comes in 12-1 record, 8-1 in Big 12 play. Wins Big 12 championship against Oklahoma State in decided fashion. Texas, again, I mentioned the program trajectory and just a lot of good things going on for Longhorns right now. I think complete effort as well. Texas has probably got one of the most complete teams in college football at this point, because the defense has looked good recently. The offense been firing on all cylinders. Quinn Ewers just had a record-breaking day against Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game, set records for passing yards, tied the record for passing touchdowns for 452 yards, 4 touchdowns. Would have been more if Texas wanted him to throw the ball more in the second half. But yeah, in Washington, this is a team that has had a lot of success under Kalen DeBoer in the last 2 years. These are two teams that really, even though both head coaches have a combined 5 years under their belts at their respective programs, and each has had tremendous success, I think, recently. And Kalen DeBoer, 24-2 in his time at Seattle. He gets Washington into the playoff in only his second year. Washington's first playoff appearance since they were under Chris Peterson in 2016. I believe that was the year with Jake Browning and
Yes.
John Ross. Yeah. They got in as a 4-seed Pac-12 champion that year. They get in as Pac-12 champion this year, undefeated, 13-0, after beating Oregon for the second time in the Pac-12 championship game, another 3-point win, similar to what they had at home over Oregon during the regular season. I believe that was in week 7. And but I think this one probably should have been closer to a 10-point game. That's kind of the feeling it had for the Pac-12 title game. I don't know if you disagree with that, but um, it
No,
it
I
was
agree. Yeah.
yeah, it was
Washington was in control. They had a little bit of lapse, towards the end of the first half and to start the second half, but they were the better football team. And credit to them because it seemed like, Oregon came in as a 9.5 point favorite. It seemed like everyone was just writing the Ducks in
yeah.
as the victor in that. So credit to Washington. And, kind of as more of a macro point, you look at it, Washington hasn't won a game by more than 10 points since September 23rd. That said, they know how to win. They've played a lot of close games. They've come out on top. They've done it in different ways. Kalen DeBoer as a head coach. So before Washington, he was at Fresno State for 2 years. Before that, he was an assistant at the FBS level for about a decade. And then before that, he was at Sioux Falls in NAIA for 5 seasons. So at Sioux Falls, Fresno State, Washington, his 3 stops as a college football head coach, his overall record is 103 wins, 11 losses. So you can say whatever you want, but this guy knows how to win at all levels of football. He can do it in many different ways. This team is not a pushover. Like I said, you can certainly look. They've won a lot of close games. That has to count for something. They know how to win when it matters most. Even in some of the games where Penix hasn't looked all that sharp, like against Arizona, for example. The defense plays very complimentary football. He makes big throws at the end. And this is a tough team. They got a lot of ways to beat you, and Texas should certainly be on notice.
I think for Washington, like you said, Kalen DeBoer is just a head coach that knows how to win. What I was saying earlier, they've been able to grind out a lot of close victories. That's kind of been the MO for them down the stretch this season. Really ever, like you said, since that Oregon game, it's been find different ways to win, find whatever way you have to win these one-score games, whether it's a game-winning field goal like they had against, wasn't that against Oregon State?
Washington State, they had a game-winning field goal.
That's right, that was Washington State. Yeah,
but Oregon State, I think they only won by 3 as well. They won by 2 against Oregon State.
Yeah. And so I mean, it's been every way you can spin it. They survived Arizona State late because Arizona State couldn't really move the ball a ton on them, but really put Arizona State and Kenny Dillingham gave Washington all they could handle in a 15-7 victory. And Stanford even. I think Stanford and Arizona both very close games. I think Arizona a better football team definitely than Stanford, but the fact that the Cardinal played Washington kind of down to the wire and only lost by 9 points, Stanford team that got handled throughout most of Pac-12 play, was impressive. And I think for Washington, it shows that while they do know how to win, this is a team that can be prone to play up and down to the competition.
What's the combined victory for Texas over their last 2 games?
78 points.
78. Washington over their last 9 games, combined victory, 52 points.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I think that's significant. Interesting stat for sure. I mean, that's what I was going to say, though, is yes, Texas has looked more complete, much more dominant efforts in the last 2 weeks than they had in the previous 3 or 4. I guess actually, really, even the previous 5 or 6, because if you want to blame it on quarterback injury, when you had Malik Murphy starting in place of Quinn Ewers against BYU and Kansas State, we beat BYU convincingly 35-6, no threat of a comeback there. But pretty much every other game since the Houston game in late October had been close up until, you put away Iowa State by 10 points. That kind of served as the turning point for Texas to win their last 3 games by double digits and beat Texas Tech and Oklahoma State much more convincingly. But again, both these teams have still at points this season had to grind out victories. So I think both teams to some degree know the narrative that, okay, at times we have struggled to put our foot on the gas and put teams away. For Washington, like you said, it's really been for most of the season, especially recently. As far as Washington goes, what they bring to the table, Michael Penix is the engine that gets them going. Guy you mentioned, going to be a Heisman finalist, had another spectacular season. Didn't he have over 4,000, I believe over 4,000 passing yards this year, again, over 30 passing touchdowns, very efficient, methodical, moving the ball for that offense. They really came out of the gates firing this season, where it seemed like Penix was throwing for over 450 and multiple touchdowns every single game. They kind of slowed down around the middle of the regular season, but when you have the type of quarterback they have and the type of receivers with guys like Romo Dunza, Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk, you'll be able to figure things out eventually and get that passing game back going. And that's exactly what they were able to do. I think didn't Jalen McMillan just torch Oregon in the Pac-12 title game and dang near double-digit catches, over 130 receiving yards and a touchdown. Yep. So he was insane. And, Romo Dunes has had another big season, one of the better wide receivers in college football. This is interesting because, you can make an argument that Texas and Washington have I would say two of the three best receiving corps in college football. You also got to include Ohio State in that mix with Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka, but Washington and Texas are loaded at the skill positions. And one thing to note too, that's a similarity between these two teams is the ground game. Washington had 1,000-yard rusher this year with, or I don't know if I know he got over 1,000 yards,
yeah,
1,000-yard rusher. Yeah. Dylan Johnson, I believe he was a Mississippi State transfer, has really turned it on, had some big games for them, had one or two games with over 200 rushing yards. And he's been a threat for them in the rushing game and the receiving game. Again, hard runner, kind of a bigger back, and he's their bell cow this year, kind of like Jonathan Brooks was for Texas before he suffered the season-ending ACL tear. But still, Texas, you've gotten good production recently out of Jaden Blue, C.J. Baxter, even Savion Red, Keelan Robinson for sure. It's going to be a running back by committee approach against Washington, but I do still think Texas is going to be able to run the football. But it'll be a challenge for Washington. One thing I did want to note with Washington in terms of the matchups against Texas is Texas is the best run defense they've faced this year, but Washington has faced other quality defensive fronts. They faced Utah, who I think is 5th in total run defense in the FBS this season. Texas ranks 4th. And Oregon is a top 15 run defense as well, and they faced them twice. Washington didn't find a ton of success running the ball against Utah or Oregon in their two matchups, but still running the ball usually above 100 yards a game and a clip around 4 yards per carry, so moderate success there. But it still builds into that bigger narrative for their offense where, they thrive by spreading the ball around to all their multiple playmakers, really being able to stretch the field as well with Penix's arm. And then, just the running game is complementary and, really keeps the offense balanced, keeps opposing defenses honest. And, for Texas, it's been a mixed bag, I think, on offense this year. For the most part, this offense has been really good. They were very good the last 2 weeks. Despite injuries, Xavier Worthy's looked really good recently. Had over 90 receiving yards against Oklahoma State, I believe. It was either over 80 or 90. JT Sanders had one of his best games of the season while still working through a lower body injury. He's still fighting some pain there, really has been the entire second half of the season, but he gashed Oklahoma State yesterday. Over 100 receiving yards, a touchdown. He looked really good. Then you got Adonai Mitchell, double-digit touchdowns on the season, his first double-digit touchdown season of his career. And then Jordan Whittington, I think he's been coming on strong in the receiving game and been solid blocking all season long. So the way Quinn Ewers was spreading the ball around, I think in that Big 12 title game, that's going to be dangerous for Washington to stop. Texas, I think, has the edge on defense in this game. Texas ranks, I think, 5th in adjusted defensive efficiency. In the FBS, Washington ranks 31st. Texas, again, has the 4th ranked run defense, averaging around 2.9 yards per carry as well. So efficient up front. You got guys like Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, but also like Jalen Ford, Anthony Hill. Safeties have been playing well in run defense as well. Texas just held maybe the Doak Walker Award winner to 34 rushing yards and under 3 yards per carry in the Big 12 championship game. Oklahoma State was held under 35 rushing yards as a team, under 2 yards per carry. So this Texas run defense looking really good. Where you get a little concerned for the Texas defense versus the Washington offense is the matchup between Washington's pass offense and Texas's secondary, especially at the safety positions. Washington's ability to stretch the field, I think, is unquestioned. They got multiple deep threats. Penix has a good deep ball. They have, I believe it's a half dozen games this season. Let's see here. Yeah, 7 games this season where they completed at least 4 deep balls. That is good for top 5 in the Power 5. So just in terms of the number of games. And so they put up big yardage. They put up over 130 deep passing yards as well in those 7 games. That's going to be a key for Texas. Can you limit the big plays? Because that's kind of been an Achilles heel at times, is allowing that deep pass. Texas has been doing a little bit better recently, but Oklahoma State still hit a couple of big shots yesterday. So that's going to be a key matchup for me. Because I'm not too worried about Texas's run defense versus Washington's ground game. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean Dylan Johnson's a great back. He should have won Pac-12 game MVP. I mean, he was the reason they won that game. 2 rushing touchdowns, over 150 yards, a passing touchdown. They just kind of gave it to Penix for whatever reason. I don't know, quarterback. All these MVP awards seem to just go to the quarterback. But yeah, Dylan Johnson is a real threat. And I think if Washington is able to find balance on offense, they are going to be very tough to stop, because you mentioned their ability to stretch the field. And if Texas has to start dragging guys down, it's going to create one-on-ones on the outside with those 3 big names you mentioned. And Texas is going to struggle to hold up. I think this is going to be a game where it's paramount that the Horns keep Washington behind the sticks and force them into these, 3rd and long situations. I think there's going to be a fair – if I'm Washington and I'm looking at it, Penix already does this, and they do this well. They throw the back shoulder well. Penix is fine kind of throwing it up to his guys and letting him make a play. We saw that with Adunze all year long. That he should, in my opinion, win the Blitnikoff. I think he had the most impressive season at the wide receiver position this year. And there are going to be a lot of times where even where you feel like you're playing good coverage, Penix is going to either fit the ball in there where there's no window, the receiver is going to make a great play, or you're going to get a pass interference. I think this is going to be a game where Texas gets called for like 3, 4, 5 defensive pass interferences, because Texas is not good. Their defensive backs are not good at getting their heads turned when the ball is in the air. It's a problem for literally everyone on the team. And that's all Washington does and Penix does, is when the defensive back has his back to the quarterback, Penix puts the ball out there. He has a terrific connection with the guys on the outside. And I think that's going to be a major issue. Like, I think we are going to see a flag show, and not anything like in the Big 12 where Texas fans could complain. There's going to be a lot of rightful pass interference penalties, because I don't know how well Texas is going to be able to going to be able to match up on the outside for 60 minutes. So that definitely does scare me, because if Washington is able to run it and balance that out, you're going to be struggling for answers. And, on the flip side, this Texas offense just continues to get better as the season rolls. I mean, played probably their most complete game of the year on Saturday. Obviously, you feel a lot more comfortable with Jonathan Brooks back there. I mentioned it on the post-game reaction show. Yes, Texas was able to run the ball decently well against Oklahoma State, but C.J. Baxter and Jaden Blue combined for 3.3 yards per carry. So there was some issues there. The Keelan Robinson long touchdown run definitely inflated the rushing statistics. Washington has a solid interior defensive line, and they're going to be tough to run against. I think this is a game where we could see both quarterbacks throw the ball, over 45 times. I think it's going to be the more fun game to watch from a neutral perspective. If you're not a fan of any 4 teams in the playoff, I think this game is going to be a track meet up and down the field, fast field in New Orleans, and I think there is going to be a lot of points, shown by the total in the low 60s right now. But it could be one of those games where whoever gets the ball last, you feel most comfortable with. Just on a complete aside, I think Bird Auburn missing the kick against Oklahoma State was the best thing that could have happened to him, because now he's not carrying that, I've made 20 straight field goals, like, when am I going to miss? It's kind of like clean slate, remove the jinx out of it all, and he's still a terrific kicker. So I think that miss actually is going to do him well. I think Texas has the advantage in the special teams game. I know the Washington kicker, in the Washington State game, he missed like 3 kicks. Like, he was awful. I think he's been pretty good all season, but that could be something that could factor into this as well. But yeah, I think it's going to be a phenomenal game. And I will say this, I think it's important to note, Kalen DeBoer is a terrific offensive mind, but there's no one I'd rather have with a month to prepare than Steve Sarkisian. Like this, if you go back and watch the first quarter of the Oklahoma State game, the script that man drew up was absolutely insane. And I was not able to fact check this, but Bud Elliott, who a co-host on the Cover 3 podcast, phenomenal college football mind, he said that Texas on Saturday had 341 yards of yak. 341 yak, which is absolutely insane. That speaks to the playmakers they have, and that speaks to Stark scheming it up, because a lot of that was, tight end screens, running back screens, short crossers, getting the ball in your playmakers' hands. And so Sark with a month to prepare, I feel confident that he's going to have some stuff drawn up his sleeve. He's going to put these guys in a phenomenal position to succeed, and it's all about execution. It's going to be about, can you get that crucial stop? Can you get that crucial turnover? But yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting matchup that I expect to be high scoring, which then kind of it doesn't thin the margins, but like, one big play, like one interception, one pick six, one fumble inside the red zone, one muff punt, something like that could loom large when these teams are scoring on 70-80% of their possessions.
Texas did well against Oklahoma State in terms of just stalling their offense and limiting their ground game, getting pressure on the quarterback. But what do we have? We had two turnovers yesterday, and I don't know that Keaton Crawford interception. I don't think that should have stood, but I think he dropped that ball. But we'll take it. And so yeah, that's going to be a key though. So responding to what you were saying about the yak yesterday, and how good Sark kind of drew up this game plan, because it was, I think Oklahoma State actually played the deep ball pretty well, considering how prone they have been to giving up yards there. Also, Ewers missed a couple of shots, but Oklahoma State is the only Power 5 team this season that's given up over 1,000 passing yards on deep balls. So they've been the worst pass defense and defending explosive plays, but they took that away and they tried to take the ground game away for the Longhorns, which worked for 2.5 quarters. And yeah, Sark was able to get his guys out in space. Like I said, I think Ewers was impressive going through his progressions, getting the ball to his playmakers, and his guys did their thing in space. It was, PFF says 342 yards after contact, 9.5 yards after contact per reception. So that means that Texas,
yards after catch.
Sorry, yes, yards after catch. That means that Texas was dang near getting a first down just in yak every time one of their receivers touched the ball.
And a lot of that has to do with the playmakers we have, but I think more of it has to do with the scheme.
Yeah, and all this isn't a Power 5 conference championship game. Like, this is, some of these stats are just unheard of that Texas had yesterday offensively. I did want to follow up on what I was saying about the deep ball with Washington, though, because there are some numbers I had found earlier today that kind of highlighted the concerns I was talking about. So Washington this year leads the Power 5 in deep passing yards and deep completions. The only FBS, Michael Penix is the only FBS quarterback with over 1,500 deep passing yards, 44 completions. I think the issue for Texas there, and ironically, Texas has allowed they've had 44 deep passing attempts against them, and they are 21st in the Power 5, or 21st lowest, I guess, would be the way to look at that, in completion percentage. So bottom half, they've allowed around 39% of deep balls to be completed. Around the middle of the pack in passer rating against and yards per coverage snap. So they've been middle of the road in the Power 5 against the deep ball, but again, it's been an area where they can be exploited against the team that's the most productive deep passing team in the nation. So that's going to be something I'm watching. But yeah, the last thing I wanted to say on I think the matchup against Washington is, if you can turn them over, you can limit the deep ball. I think that's where you can win this game, because then you kind of force Washington, like you said, you put them off schedule, you put them off script, get them behind the chains, force them to run the ball with Dylan Johnson, which he's a good running back, but I would take that matchup 10 days out of 10 in the playoff, if that's what it comes down to, is trying to run the ball with Dylan Johnson against Texas's defensive front. Also, Texas's offense, Washington, they're a decent defense. Like you said, their interior defensive line is pretty good, but they're 31st in the FBS in adjusted defensive efficiency. So good, not great. And they've kind of struggled to defend the run against like quality rushing teams this year. Not completely, but Oregon State ran the ball around 4 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns, 150 yards. USC over 200 rushing yards, 8 yards per carry. Oregon didn't run the ball a ton, but when they did, they were effective. 124 yards, 2 touchdowns, over 6 yards per carry, over 5 yards per carry, and over 200 yards Oregon had in their first matchup. So Texas can run the ball, and that's really been the key for Texas is you don't have to put up like 300 plus rushing yards like you did. What was that against Tech? But what did they have yesterday? 198 or something against Oklahoma State, and that still was easily enough to get the job done, especially when you don't have Jonathan Brooks. But through the air, Washington has been prone to giving up a lot of yards there too. They've given up over 300 passing yards and 3 touchdowns 3 times this season, and they've given up over 310 yards on 5 occasions. A few of those games were to Washington State, Cal, and Stanford. And I get it. Wazoo has a good quarterback, or did have a good quarterback because Cam Ward transferred. But, Stanford, not an explosive passing offense by any means. So, teams have gashed them before through the air. So that's where your opportunity if you're Texas. I think complementary ground game and, be able to take advantage of Washington in space. You got the edge, right, when you're looking at Washington's secondary against Texas's offense. Mind you, too, Washington's best corner, Texas has faced multiple times. Jabbar Muhammad, he's an Oklahoma State transfer. He's done well against Texas, but you've seen him before. So you know what his tendencies are. That'll be an interesting matchup, I think.
Yeah, so, that's a fair point and a good tidbit. I will say Washington, when they gave up 42 to USC, that's a game that Sark and probably not Sark himself, but the staff has already watched over and has prepared, because that's a good script to follow. USC in that game, 200 yards after the catch. So you get some fast guys in space. Washington, can struggle wrapping up and bringing guys to the ground.
Yeah, so I mean, between I believe Elijah Jackson is actually their other corner. I think Thaddeus Dixon has gotten some reps there too, but Jabbar Muhammad is their number one guy. Elijah Jackson, Thad Dixon work in there too. Powell, Texas faced last season and got some production against them. So, like you said, they've been giving up yards after the catch. Texas been productive against some of these guys before, so I like that matchup. And what's up?
Also, so if you look at Washington, you have a month to prepare. You're going through all the game tape, obviously, but I mean, it just looking at it on paper, you turn to the USC game. If you want an offensive game plan, you turn to their 15-7 win over Arizona State. If you want a defensive game plan. On the flip side, if you are Washington, what Texas games do you look at and you point to and you say, that's what we want to do? Because Texas has been really interesting this season. Obviously, the one loss to Oklahoma, we know all about the quarterback run. But the loss and even the games that have been close, which have seen a lot of second-half comebacks, it's like Texas was almost a shell of itself when those comebacks were happening. Like, they weren't playing typical base Texas defense. So it just hypothetically, if you're Kalen DeBoer in Washington, what games are you looking at saying this is what we want to replicate?
I mean, you make a valid point that I think, there's more opportunities to exploit Washington from what's been seen on film and, complete game form. Whereas for Texas, yeah, I mean, you probably mix in, if I had to say, you probably mix in some of some of the Kansas State game with spreading out Texas. Also, probably more notably, you mix in like TCU and Houston, because those are more similar offenses that like to spread you out more. And had quarterbacks that can gash you for over 300 yards. Whereas Will Howard more the dual threat guy. But Michael Penix can run the ball. But also, the way that OU was able to exploit Texas for a mix of, some underneath stuff and not really a deep shot, but the quarterback run game, mixing that in occasionally, I think that they will take something away from that as well as some of OU's defensive game plan, just in the sense that, if you can recognize what Texas is doing early on, because, Washington already faced Texas last season, so they had a month to prepare last year, face the same quarterback. I know Brent Venables is a much like one of the best defensive minds among head coaches in college football. Kalen DeBoer, more of an offensive minded guy. So it's not necessarily the same, but I still think there's something you can get there. But Washington, you got to hit the deep ball. I think like it's the primary component of their offense, and Texas has been prone to it before. I keep mentioning it, I know, but I think like if you can do that, then their offense really stays on schedule. They can run the ball and really control the clock potentially against Texas. That's how they would like that game to go, I'm sure. Let's go ahead and do at this point like our early predictions. We can throw a bold prediction in here, and then also do just college football playoff in general. So let's start with this game, then we can look at the rest of the playoff, and then we can do let's do this game, then bold prediction, then we can look at the playoff. I'll start because I actually had a score in mind already.
Okay.
For some reason, I can see this game being, I mean, not for some reason, I think it'll be a high scoring game. So it makes sense if it would be in the 30s for each team. But
yep.
I'm going to go 38-34 Texas. I think they're going to be around the spread. I do think it's going to be a closer game, but I think Texas has enough to where, when Washington has won some of these big games this season, they've really either been able to shut down an offense they're facing, which they were able to really limit Oregon last week. And I don't think that Oregon necessarily has the array of playmakers that Texas does at the skill spots, especially at tight end, where especially given Xavier Worthy and JT Sanders a month to get healthy, like Texas can, I think, have their full array of like receiving core weapons available to them. And again, a month for Sark to prepare. I think he's better offensive mind than Dan Lanning for sure. But Texas, you're going to give up some points here, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Around it.
I completely agree. I don't have a score prediction yet, but I think I'm pretty much on the same page as you. I have Texas in a close one. That's probably going to be in the mid to high 30s. So your 38-34 is kind of, right where I'm at as well. It's hard to pick. I picked against Texas twice this year, the Alabama game and then the Iowa State game. So I was wrong both times. So as much as people might want me to pick against Texas to keep the trend going, I can't do it. I think this team is more complete than Washington. They have a higher ceiling. I'll reference Bud Elliott again because if you don't know who he is, look him up. Phenomenal college football mind. Not plugging people, but he is awesome. He has Georgia and Texas as the two best teams in the country when they play to their ceiling. And this is a game where I think we can expect Texas, maybe not to their ceiling, but they're going to play at least a B+, A- type of game. Like we mentioned, you give Sark that time. I think team's going to be fired up. Obviously, you don't have to say that, but you have a veteran-led squad that's been through a lot, and they're hungry. We saw how they played in their first opportunity in a Big 12 championship game. Can just only imagine how that ratchets up in a college football playoff semifinal. So I think the Horns come out and play a good game, and you will need to play a good game to beat Washington. Make no mistake about it. I think they do it. I think they get it done. One possession, high-scoring football game.
Yeah, I would probably put a little pushback to Bud Elliott there. I think Ohio State's got to be up there too, just in terms of talent if they're playing up to their ceiling. So Ohio State's just so good at almost every position. But whatever. Those three teams for me are probably the most talented and most capable of playing to an elite level. Okay, so did you give a bold prediction there? I didn't think you did.
Yeah, I guess my bold prediction I think this could be a Jaden Blue game. I think he could, okay. Maybe not in terms of carries, but I think he could finish with more yards than CJ Baxter. I think you could see him have a good, solid receiving showing as well. Obviously caught the touchdown yesterday against Oklahoma State, but we mentioned that Yak has been a little bit of an issue for the Washington defense. Blue's one of the fastest guys on your team. I think Sark's going to try to get him the ball in various ways. And, he only averaged 3.3 yards per carry against Oak State. There was a couple runs, if you go back and look, where he was a shoestring tackle. And if not, that's going for a long touchdown run. So I expect Jaden Blue to get in space and play really well.
I'm going to have two bold predictions. For me, the best thing to come in twos on this one. I'm going to say that Jody Barron gets 2 interceptions against Michael Penix. This is a
Ooh,
very bold prediction for me because usually with my bold predictions, I have some logic that goes into it. And this one, I'm just shooting a shot.
I like it.
Um, and then the second one, this one has a little bit more logic to it. I do think that Quinn Ewers finds Xavier Worthy for 2 deep passing touchdowns. I think that Worthy's going to have be eager to prove a point on this one. I think for Quinn, you got a month to figure out the deep ball. At least hit a couple of shots because I know it wasn't key against Oklahoma State, but it probably will be a bigger part of the game plan against Washington to hit a couple of those big plays. Um, and then yeah, so those are my two. Okay, so college football, like generic playoff predictions.
Mhm.
So I picked Texas to win the Sugar Bowl semifinal. I'm gonna pick Michigan to win the Rose Bowl semifinal, and then I'm gonna pick Michigan to win it all.
I will pick Michigan to beat Alabama. I think Milrose just a little too inconsistent. He'll turn it over once or twice. That'll be the difference. Whatever you think about J.J. McCarthy, the one thing he doesn't do is give the ball away. So I think Michigan's going to play this game on their own terms, and they'll win a tight one. And then, so I have Texas, Michigan. I got Texas over Michigan. I think Texas matches up well with Michigan. I mean, we saw yesterday, Michigan final score against Iowa 26-0. Their 2 touchdown drives, we were talking about this off air, were combined 11 yards. They had a punt return inside the 5 and then a fumble recovery. And they really couldn't run the ball. And obviously, Michigan's been all about the run this year, but they showed against Iowa when they play a very stout run defense, they could have some trouble. And on the flip side, like what I just said about McCarthy, he's not going to give it away, but that's because he doesn't have to do a whole lot. If you stop the run game and you put some scoreboard pressure on him and McCarthy has to start slinging it, I think he could get himself into a bit of trouble. Even if it's not with the turnovers, I just don't have the confidence in him to be able to pass for 350 yards and exploit this Texas defense where they're vulnerable. So personally, I think Michigan is a better matchup for Texas than Washington. But I'm going to have them beating them both, so I guess it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. We'll have plenty of time to talk about this, but yeah, interesting. Okay, so I got Michigan winning. You got Texas winning for our early predictions. Not going to hold anyone to anything because we'll do our more in-depth stuff later, but just interesting to take a look at.
True.
But anyway, for Shane Black, Andrew Miller, Hook'emHeadlines.com, Hook'em Orange Show, that's pretty much it. Welcome.
Hook 'em.